October 23rd, 1944. The Formosa Strait, between Taiwan and mainland China. The USS Tang, an American Gato-class submarine commanded by Commander Richard O'Kane, was stalking a Japanese convoy. O'Kane had already established himself as one of the most aggressive and successful submarine commanders in the Pacific. But what he was about to do over the next 4 days would become legendary. Between October 23rd and October 26, 1944, just 4 days, the Tang would sink 5 Japanese ships, totaling over 13,000 tons. The Tang would attack convoy after convoy with relentless aggression. It would fire nearly every torpedo it carried. It would dodge Japanese escorts, evade depth charges, and strike again and again. The Japanese called American submarines destroyer killers because they were so effective at sinking warships and merchant vessels. But what the Tang did in those 4 days went beyond anything the Japanese had encountered. 5 ships, 4 days, 1 submarine. And then on the 4th night, something went catastrophically wrong. The Tang's final torpedo malfunctioned, circled back, and struck the Tang itself. The submarine sank in seconds. Of the 87 men aboard, only 9 survived, including O'Kane, who endured one of the most harrowing survival stories in naval history. This is the complete story of the USS Tang's final patrol, the destroyer killer that lived up to its name. The 4 days of relentless attacks that shocked the Japanese Navy, the commander who was too aggressive for his own good, and the tragic accident that ended one of the most successful combat patrols in submarine warfare history. To understand why the Tang's performance was so extraordinary, you need to understand submarine warfare in the Pacific in 1944. And the answer is, it was brutal, dangerous, and devastatingly effective. American submarines were waging unrestricted warfare against Japan. Any Japanese ship, military or civilian, was a legitimate target. This was revenge for Pearl Harbor and a strategic necessity to strangle Japan's war economy. Japan was an island nation completely dependent on imports. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, food from across Asia, raw materials for industry. Everything had to be shipped by sea. American submarines were systematically destroying Japan's merchant fleet. By 1944, Japanese shipping losses were catastrophic. Hundreds of ships had been sunk. Japan couldn't build replacements fast enough. The economy was strangling. The statistics were brutal. American submarines comprised less than 2% of U.S. Navy forces, but sank over 50% of all Japanese ships destroyed during the war. That's an incredible return on investment. But submarine warfare was dangerous. Japanese destroyers and escort vessels were getting better at anti-submarine warfare. Depth charges were becoming more sophisticated. Sonar was improving. American submarines were being sunk with increasing frequency. By late 1944, the submarine war had become a deadly game of cat and mouse. American subs would track convoys, attack when vulnerable, then dive deep and evade the counterattacks. It required nerve, skill, and aggression. The USS Tang was one of the most successful submarines in the Pacific, commissioned in October 1943. It was a Gato-class submarine, 311 feet long, displacing 1,525 tons on the surface, capable of 20 knots on the surface and 9 knots submerged. The Tang carried 24 torpedoes, a mix of Mark 14 steam torpedoes and the newer Mark 18 electric torpedoes. The Mark 14S were faster but left a visible wake. The Mark 18S were slower but ran without a wake, making them harder to detect. American submarine torpedoes had been notoriously unreliable early in the war. The Mark 14 had faulty depth control, faulty magnetic exploders, and faulty contact exploders. Torpedoes would run too deep, explode prematurely, or hit targets without exploding. By 1944, most of these problems had been fixed through combat testing and engineering improvements. The torpedoes were now reliable, which made American submarines far more deadly. The Tang's commander was Richard O'Kane, a 34-year-old from New Hampshire, who had previously served as executive officer on the USS Wahoo under the legendary commander, Dudley "Mush" Morton. O'Kane had learned aggressive submarine tactics from Morton, and when he got his own command, he applied those lessons ruthlessly. O'Kane's philosophy was simple. Attack, attack, attack. Get close to targets for accurate shots. Fire multiple torpedoes to ensure kills. Don't waste time on single ships when you could attack entire convoys. Accept risk to maximize results. This made O'Kane both incredibly successful and incredibly dangerous to serve under. His crew respected him, but knew that every patrol was a high-risk operation. The Tang's fifth war patrol began in September 1944. The submarine departed Pearl Harbor, heading for the waters around Taiwan and the China coast, one of the busiest shipping lanes for Japanese convoys, moving between the occupied territories and Japan. O'Kane's orders were straightforward: sink as much Japanese tonnage as possible, disrupt shipping, create chaos, make the Japanese Navy commit resources to convoy protection. For the first few weeks of the patrol, the Tang stalked various targets, but didn't have clear opportunities. O'Kane was patient, waiting for the perfect setup. Then, on October 10th, the Tang encountered a convoy and sank 2 ships. This was a successful engagement, but O'Kane wasn't satisfied. He wanted bigger targets and more kills. On October 23rd, everything changed. The Tang detected a large Japanese convoy heading north through the Formosa Strait. Multiple cargo ships, tankers, and escorted by destroyers. This was exactly what O'Kane had been waiting for. October 23rd, late evening. The Tang surfaced under cover of darkness and began tracking the convoy. O'Kane planned a night surface attack. The Tang would maneuver at high speed on the surface, fire torpedoes from close range, then dive or retreat at high speed before escorts could respond. Night surface attacks were risky but effective. Japanese destroyers had difficulty detecting submarines on the surface at night. The submarine could use its surface speed to position for perfect shots, and the cover of darkness made escape easier. O'Kane positioned the Tang ahead of the convoy, then turned to attack from an optimal angle. At 2 a.m. on October 24th, the Tang fired a spread of 6 torpedoes at 3 cargo ships. 4 hits, 2 ships, the Joshugo, 6,600 tons, and Oita Maru, 711 tons, sank within minutes. A 3rd ship was damaged. The Japanese escorts immediately began searching for the submarine, but O'Kane had already maneuvered the Tang away at high speed. The escorts dropped depth charges in the wrong area while the Tang escaped. O'Kane wasn't done. He reloaded torpedoes and continued tracking the convoy. Several hours later, he attacked again, sinking another cargo ship. 3 ships sunk in one night, but O'Kane was just getting started. October 24th, daytime. The Tang tracked another convoy heading south. O'Kane followed at periscope depth throughout the day, waiting for nightfall to attack. At dusk, he surfaced and began another high-speed pursuit. By midnight, the Tang was in position. October 25th, 12:30 a.m. The Tang fired another spread of torpedoes. One more cargo ship, the Tatsuju Maru, 1,658 tons, exploded and sank. 4 ships in less than 24 hours. The Japanese Navy was now fully aware that a submarine was operating in the area. Destroyers and patrol craft were searching intensively. Radio traffic indicated the Japanese were furious and determined to find and sink the destroyer killer that was devastating their convoys. But O'Kane wasn't retreating. He still had torpedoes. There were still targets. He would continue attacking. October 25th, daytime. The Tang spotted yet another convoy. O'Kane tracked it all day, planning his attack. His crew was exhausted from days of continuous operations, but O'Kane pushed them hard. One more night. One more attack. October 25th evening. The Tang surfaced and began its attack run. This convoy was heavily escorted multiple destroyers, alert and searching. O'Kane knew this would be dangerous, but he also knew this might be his last chance. The Tang had only a few torpedoes left. After this attack, they'd have to return to base regardless. O'Kane decided to go for broke. He would attack from extremely close range, closer than any submarine commander would normally dare. The risk was enormous, but the accuracy would be perfect. October 25th, 11 p.m. The Tang closed to less than 1,000 yards from the convoy, practically point-blank range for submarine warfare. At this distance, torpedoes couldn't miss. But at this distance, the Tang was also in extreme danger from escorts and from detection. O'Kane fired a spread of torpedoes, multiple hits. The cargo ship, Kogan Maru, 6,600 tons, exploded and sank. 5 ships, 4 days. The Tang now had only 2 torpedoes remaining, one forward, one aft. O'Kane decided to fire both at remaining targets in the convoy to expend all ammunition before retreating. At 2 a.m. on October 26th, the Tang fired its 23rd torpedo of the patrol from the forward tube. The torpedo ran true and struck a transport ship. Now only one torpedo remained, the 24th and final torpedo, loaded in the aft torpedo tube. O'Kane positioned the Tang for one last shot. There was a damaged transport nearby, listing and burning, but still afloat. One more torpedo would finish it. At 2:30 a.m., O'Kane gave the order. Fire tube number 24. The torpedo launched from the aft tube. The crew waited for the explosion that would mark their final kill of the patrol. But something went wrong. Instead of running straight toward the target, the torpedo began turning. Its steering mechanism had malfunctioned, a mechanical failure in the torpedo's gyroscope or rudder control. The torpedo was circling, and it was circling back toward the Tang. On the bridge, O'Kane and the lookouts saw the torpedo's wake in the moonlight. It was heading straight for them. O'Kane ordered emergency maneuvers. All ahead flank, hard right rudder, dive, dive. The Tang began turning hard, engines at maximum power, trying to evade its own torpedo. The diving alarm sounded. The crew scrambled to seal hatches and dive the boat. But there wasn't enough time. The torpedo was too close, moving too fast. 20 seconds after launch, the Tang's own torpedo struck the Tang's aft section, right near where it had been fired from. The explosion was catastrophic. The aft torpedo room was destroyed instantly, killing everyone there. The explosion ruptured the pressure hull. Water flooded in at high pressure. The Tang sank in seconds. The submarine went down so fast that most of the crew didn't have time to escape or even understand what was happening. Of the 87 men aboard, 78 were trapped inside the sinking submarine. Only 9 men were on or near the bridge when the torpedo hit. They were blown into the water by the explosion or jumped as the sub went down. Those 9 men suddenly found themselves in the water in the middle of a Japanese convoy that was now in full alert. Destroyers were everywhere, searching for the submarine that had just attacked them. Depth charges were being dropped. Searchlights swept the water. Commander O'Kane and 8 crewmen tried to stay afloat and stay hidden. Some had life jackets. Others clung to debris. They were wounded, exhausted, and watching Japanese ships pass nearby in the darkness. The Tang had sunk in only 180 feet of water, shallow enough that survivors inside might be able to escape using emergency procedures. But that also meant the Japanese could see where the submarine had gone down. Inside the sunken Tang, the situation was desperate. The forward and after sections were flooding. Men were trapped in compartments that were filling with water. Some compartments were sealed, but filling with toxic air as carbon dioxide built up. In the forward torpedo room, several men were still alive. They had access to Momsen-Lung's emergency escape breathing devices that allowed sailors to ascend from sunken submarines. The Momsen-Lung was a rubber bag that recycled exhaled air and provided oxygen for ascent. Using the Momsen-Lungs required following precise procedures: flood the escape trunk, equalize pressure, and ascend slowly while breathing from the lung and exhaling continuously to prevent lung damage from expanding air. 8 men in the forward torpedo room attempted the escape. They flooded the escape trunk, equalized pressure, and began ascending one at a time. 5 made it to the surface alive. 3 died during the ascent, either from lung rupture, drowning, or decompression effects. Combined with the 9 men who were on the bridge when the torpedo hit, there were now 14 Tang survivors in the water. But they were in the middle of a Japanese convoy. Dawn was approaching, and the Japanese were searching for survivors to capture. As the sun rose on October 26th, Japanese destroyers spotted the survivors in the water. They picked them up, not for rescue, but for capture. Commander O'Kane and the other survivors were pulled from the water by Japanese sailors. They were now prisoners of war. The Japanese interrogated them immediately. The interrogators wanted to know everything. How many American submarines were in the area? What were their orders? Where were they going next? How did the Tang sink? O'Kane and the crew refused to give any information beyond name, rank, and serial number as required by the Geneva Convention. The Japanese were particularly interested in how the Tang had sunk. They'd seen the explosion and knew the submarine went down, but they didn't understand what caused it. They suspected they'd hit it with a depth charge, or that another Japanese ship had torpedoed it. O'Kane couldn't bring himself to admit the truth that the Tang had been sunk by its own malfunctioning torpedo. That admission would be too humiliating. So he remained silent, letting the Japanese believe they'd sunk the submarine. The survivors were taken to prisoner-of-war camps in Japan and China. The conditions were brutal: inadequate food, no medical care, brutal treatment by guards. Men who had survived the sinking and the escape now had to survive months of imprisonment. Several more Tang survivors died in POW camps from disease, malnutrition, and mistreatment. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, only 9 Tang survivors remained alive: Commander Richard O'Kane and 8 enlisted men. They were liberated by American forces and returned home. O'Kane was hospitalized for months, recovering from injuries, malnutrition, and the effects of imprisonment. In 1946, after recovering, O'Kane received the Medal of Honor for his actions during the Tang's final patrol. The citation praised his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in attacking Japanese convoys relentlessly despite heavy enemy presence. The Medal of Honor ceremony was bittersweet. O'Kane was being honored for the patrol that killed 78 of his crew. He was praised for aggression that ultimately contributed to his own ship's loss. He accepted the medal, but carried guilt for the rest of his life. The Tang's final patrol statistics were extraordinary. 5 ships sunk in 4 days. October 23rd, 26, 1944. 13,000 plus tons of Japanese shipping destroyed. 24 torpedoes fired. 22 hits. 92% hit rate, extraordinary for submarine warfare. Total career: 33 ships sunk. 116,000 plus tons, including previous patrols. The Tang was the most successful American submarine in terms of ships sunk. No other U.S. submarine sank more Japanese vessels, but the success came at a terrible cost. 78 men killed by their own torpedo, 9 survivors who endured months of brutal captivity, a commander who lived with the knowledge that his final attack had killed most of his crew. Post-war investigation determined what went wrong with the 24th torpedo. The Mark 18 electric torpedo had a known issue with gyroscope stability. After firing, if the gyroscope wasn't perfectly calibrated, the torpedo could go into a circular run instead of straight. This was a rare failure. It happened in less than 1% of launches. But when it happened, it was catastrophic. Several submarines had reported circular runs. At least one other submarine, the USS Tang, had been sunk by its own circular running torpedo in March 1944. The Navy knew about the problem, but hadn't been able to fix it completely. The electric torpedoes were too valuable. They ran without a wake, making them harder to detect, so they continued using them despite the risk. O'Kane had been unlucky, 1 in 100 chance. But in submarine warfare, you fire hundreds of torpedoes, and eventually the low-probability disaster happens. Could O'Kane have avoided it? Some historians argue he was too aggressive, attacking from too close, giving himself no margin for error. If he had been further from the target, a circular run might have missed the Tang. Others argue O'Kane was doing exactly what submarine commanders should do, pressing attacks, accepting risk, maximizing results. The circular run was just bad luck, not bad judgment. O'Kane himself never second-guessed his tactics. In post-war interviews, he defended his aggressive approach. He believed submarines had to take risks to be effective. Playing it safe meant missing opportunities and letting Japanese ships escape. Every ship we didn't sink, he said, would carry supplies that might kill American soldiers somewhere else. We had to be aggressive. The risks were necessary. But he also lived with profound grief for his lost crew. He attended reunions of Tang survivors every year until his death. He kept in touch with families of men who died. He never forgot the 78 men who went down with the Tang. The Japanese reaction to the Tang's final patrol was revealing. They were shocked by the submarine's effectiveness. 5 ships in 4 days was unprecedented. The Japanese Navy had encountered aggressive American submarines before, but the Tang's performance exceeded anything they'd seen. Japanese convoy escorts were already overwhelmed by American submarine attacks across the Pacific. But incidents like the Tang's final patrol demonstrated just how vulnerable Japanese shipping was. The Tang had attacked convoy after convoy with apparent impunity. Japanese destroyers had dropped depth charges, but never got close to actually sinking the Tang. Irony noted the Tang sank itself. The American submarine had dictated the terms of every engagement. Japanese naval reports from late 1944 show increasing alarm about submarine attacks. They were losing ships faster than they could replace them. merchant marine recruitment was becoming difficult because sailors knew the mortality rate was over 50% worse odds than combat infantry. The destroyer-killer submarines were winning the war of attrition. Japan's economy was being strangled by submarine warfare far more effectively than by strategic bombing or surface naval battles. The Tang's career demonstrated this perfectly. In 5 war patrols, the Tang had sunk 33 ships totaling 116,000 tons. That's enormous economic damage from one submarine. Multiply that across hundreds of American submarines, and Japan's shipping collapse becomes understandable. O'Kane retired from the Navy in 1957 as a rear admiral. He wrote a memoir, Clear the Bridge, published in 1977, describing his wartime experiences. The book is considered one of the best first-hand accounts of submarine warfare. In the book, O'Kane was honest about the Tang's sinking. He described the circular run, the desperate attempt to evade, the explosion, the sinking. He didn't try to hide or minimize what happened. He also paid tribute to his crew. They were the best submariners in the Navy. Every man did his duty perfectly. The loss wasn't their fault. It wasn't even really my fault. It was a mechanical failure that we couldn't predict or prevent. But it happened. And 78 good men died because of it. O'Kane died in 1994 at age 83. His funeral was attended by surviving Tang crewmen and families of those who didn't survive. The Navy honored him as one of the greatest submarine commanders in history. The USS Tang was never raised. It still sits on the bottom of the Formosa Strait, the tomb of 78 American sailors. The wreck was located in the 1990s and is designated a war grave. No salvage or disturbance is permitted. The story of the Tang's final patrol remains one of the most dramatic in submarine warfare history. It combines incredible combat success with tragic loss. It shows both the effectiveness and the danger of aggressive submarine tactics. It demonstrates how technology can fail at the worst possible moment. The Tang sank 5 Japanese ships in 4 days, shocking the Japanese Navy with its relentless attacks. Then it sank itself with its own torpedo, shocking the submarine community with the sudden reversal of fortune. 9 survivors, 78 lost, 1 Medal of Honor, and a lesson that in war, success and tragedy can be separated by seconds and by mechanical failures too small to see. The destroyer-killer that lived up to its name and paid the ultimate price for its success. Titles: Japanese were shocked when one U.S. destroyer-killer sub sank 5 ships in just 4 days. USS Tang, USS Tang, the submarine that sank 5 Japanese ships in 4 days and sank itself. True story. Attack, attack, attack. The most aggressive subcommander's final patrol, Richard O'Kane's story. The destroyer-killer. How USS Tang sank 5 ships, then was destroyed by its own torpedo, Walotwo. 33 ships sunk, 78 men lost. The USS Tang's Triumph and Tragedy Submarine Warfare documentary. Tags: USS Tang, Submarine Warfare, Richard O'Kane, Pacific War, World War II, Japanese convoys, torpedo malfunction, circular run. Destroyer-killer, Gato-class submarine. Formosa Strait, merchant shipping, aggressive tactics, Medal of Honor, prisoner of war, Moms and Long, submarine escape, 5 ships 4 days, 33 ships sunk, most successful submarine, Mark 18. Torpedo, night surface attack, depth charges, submarine commander, naval warfare, submarine tactics, Pacific Fleet, unrestricted warfare, convoy attacks, Japanese merchant marine, shipping losses, submarine sinking, own torpedo, friendly fire, catastrophic failure, survival story, POW camps, liberation, post-war, naval history, submarine patrol, torpedo room, escape trunk, war grave, clear the bridge, memoir, rear admiral, submarine community, tactical aggression, combat success, tragic loss.